Hey, have you ever noticed how every time we see a dad in some form of fiction, he's either a deadbeat, a dumbass, evil, or some combination of the three? And if you have you ever wondered why that is? Well, so have I, and I've come to two, I think, fairly unique conclusions about it, or at least ones I haven't heard anyone else bring up on YouTube. Feel free to let me know how wrong about that I am down in the comments. Opinion 1, by far the least controversial. The reason for the fictional trope of the dead, absentee, or otherwise MIA fathers in fiction, especially for male protagonists, is very simply because one of the most effective and poignant means of creating an underdog is by throwing said protagonist into the deep end of life without anyone having been there to teach him how to so much as tread water first. So far, so textbook, or I suppose storybook, as the case may be. However, that's before we get to opinion number 2. The reason why every sitcom dad is a fat, lazy, brain-dead, possibly drunk, depending on the rating, slob is because of Homer Simpson. Now, before you go spamming me with facepalm emojis, just hear me out, because I think there's a bit more to this than you might initially appreciate. You see, whenever people talk about how dads are portrayed in our modern media, they seem to address it like it's the product of a grand global conspiracy to undermine the nuclear family and thereby Western civilization. But as with all conspiracies, the first and most important question you need to ask is, who benefits? Keep that question in the back of your mind. We'll come back to it near the end of the video. For right now, though, in order to understand what it has to do with Homer Simpson, I need to give you a quick primer on the psychology of comedy. That is, why do humans find things funny? What compels us to laugh at certain things and not others? In the most basic sense, all forms of comedy, when you get right down to it, rely on 3 key components: surprise, psychological tension, and absurdity. The former is fairly self-explanatory. A situation or event or topic that would be, if presented in a completely serious fashion, too neurologically stressful for the ordinary person's synapses to handle, and therefore impossible for them to process, let alone internalize. However, we can alleviate that stress, that tension, by making the offending phenomenon absurd. How do we do that? Quite simply, absurdity is the psychological effect of a thing which appears internally, but not externally, contiguous. To put that into more layman's jargon, when a phenomenon makes logical sense to you in a vacuum, but then loses the plot entirely when placed into its full context, it's absurd. For example, if you saw an actual cat get its face smashed in by a brick, you probably wouldn't find that funny. However, when Tom from Tom and Jerry runs headlong into a wall and turns into an accordion, provided you didn't know it was coming, it would be funny precisely because each individual aspect of the scene makes sense to you. The cat chasing the mouse, the cat running into the wall due to his tactical tunnel vision, the fact that things tend to crumple when they meet an immovable object at unhealthy speeds, etc. The logical discord between their combination makes the scene absurd, and the unexpected catharsis of that absurdity is what makes it funny. And now that we understand roughly how comedy works, let's now go ahead and apply its process and principles to The Simpsons. Anyone with even the vaguest inkling of how the human mating game works knows that, in non-absurd reality, the idea that any woman with any amount of brain power whatsoever would ever consider settling down with Homer Simpson, much less that he could support a middle-class suburban family, and much, much less that he could hold down a job as a nuclear engineer, is objectively, patently, and in all other ways, completely absurd, and hence funny. Likewise is the case for the TV commercial dad who somehow managed to marry and procreate despite being too incompetent to change a diaper or work a washing machine. Now, do you see where I'm going with all this? The Simpsons is the most popular, or at least the longest-running show in television history, because the formula it established is so inherently absurd that it makes any and all situations taking place around it equally so, hence situational comedy, thus making it a prime vehicle for delivering what would otherwise be highly offensive social and political commentary. And because all the corporate bean counters who run the network stations and studios and advertising companies know how to do is play-follow the leader, every other sitcom for the next 40 years would ape The Simpsons formula, at least in the broadest strokes. Just so is the case with commercials. Since the heavy majority of advertising is done to appeal to women, since anywhere from 70 to 90% of domestic spending is done by women, depending on their age, location, and income level. It then stands to reason that the advertisers would bend their commercials to make the wife appear the better half of the couple. And since comedy is an excellent vehicle for sales, what with it being a lot easier to get people to buy stuff if they like you, and the quickest way to make people like you is to make them laugh. It's a match made in cynical corporate heaven. The most obvious problem with this to anyone with more common sense than the average corporate monkey is that after 2 or 3 generations of being bombarded by this absurdist trope from every angle, people have forgotten that it was meant to be a joke. At which point the nefarious political activists swooped in to capitalize on the growing "don't need no man" sentiment. And we all know how that particular snowball tumbles from there. And with that in mind, let's at last come back once more and tackle our little conspiracy theory again. Occam's razor says that when faced with 2 equally likely hypotheses, in the absence of deciding evidence, the hypothesis dependent on the fewest assumptions is generally the more likely. In this case, our options for how we got into this particular mess are A. There's been a massive multi-generational conspiracy by every conceivable institution and agency under the sun to derail their own gravy train for no apparent reason. Or B. A bunch of greedy corporations and petty government bureaucrats have simply been doing what they do unchallenged for 40 years, and we're all stuck now living with the consequences. I'll let you decide which of those you think is more likely. But anyway, that's where I think I'll sign off on this particular topic. As usual, leave your thoughts below. If you like this content and know anyone else who may too, consider sharing it around. Check out my books, community poll, subscribe, and all that other standard YouTuber BS. And until next time, stay safe, stay sane, and remember, Mercury's more radiation-proof than tin. Peace.